Hello, my name is Katie Deluski. I work with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System at Auburn University. I'm going to talk to you today about native plants and how we can use them to remediate some small-scale erosion problems in your own backyard. So what are native plants? Well, they have several benefits associated with them. Native plants are naturally occurring in the area without human interaction. And so these plants are already adapted to our climate and precipitation patterns, which is important for the southeast because we do frequently experience droughty summers and we need to plant or install plants that are acclimated to these conditions. Native plants also promote native wildlife. They are considered to be low maintenance. They have relatively few pest problems. They have low water and fertilizer inputs and are just considered low maintenance, and we'd like to promote these in our landscapes and in our riparian buffers. Native plants also help to enhance wildlife. They provide habitat, shelter, and food for many of our native insects and small mammals. They can, when planted in a riparian buffer, these plants will reduce water temperatures by providing shade and cover to the stream. They can also provide seeds for wildlife, such as small mammals and birds, and also provide nectar for butterflies, bees, and moths. So, in essence, buffers are their own ecosystem. Buffers can provide wildlife corridors by connecting forested areas. In our rapidly urbanizing watersheds, and as we continue to develop, we're losing a lot of our native plants and habitat for wildlife. So by enhancing streamside buffers using native plants, we can begin to reconnect some of these otherwise detached forested areas. And so we can promote native plants and native wildlife not only in our riparian buffers but also in our own backyard by utilizing these plants in our landscapes. Research has shown that buffers greater than 100 feet can enhance species abundance for reptiles, amphibians, small mammals, birds, insects, and fish. So it's all about planting the right plant in the right place. And so we'll talk today about wetland indicator status, where to plant, plant sizes, costs, and timing. And these are all important when we consider planning to enhance our riparian buffer. So I thought I'd introduce the terms hydrophyte and non-hydrophyte. When we dissect the word hydrophyte, we come up with a water-loving plant. These plants are adapted to wet conditions and are also flood tolerant. Most importantly, these plants can or have the ability to have structural adaptations, and so we'll talk about these in just a minute. Non-hydrophytes are the direct opposite of our hydrophytes. These do not tolerate flooding, and these are considered upland plants. Structural adaptations that our wetland plants can develop are extensive root systems that they can use for stability. Their roots also have the ability to tolerate low oxygen or hypoxic conditions. You may also have roots that form only at the surface where oxygen is in higher concentration in the soil. And these plants are able to adapt to those conditions. They may also develop parenchyma tissue, which is a porous tissue that is used for air or gas transfer from the above ground portion of the plant down to the below ground portion of the plant. They may also develop adventitious roots, and these are simply roots that may develop on the lower portions of the stem where the stem is in contact with moist conditions or a wet soil. So when we start to think about our wetland plants, we really need to think about wetland indicator status. And so many of you have probably conducted wetland delineations and are very familiar with wetland indicator status. Previously, the wetland indicator status was based on the frequency of a species to occur naturally in a wetland. The new list will rank plants based on whether or not they regularly occur as a hydrophyte or a non-hydrophyte. So today when we look at plants, you'll notice that many of the facultative plants may have a plus or a minus sign. And on the old list, this plus sign indicated a plant's tendency towards wetter conditions, and the minus sign indicated the plant's tendency towards the drier conditions. The new list will place plants with a plus or minus sign in their broader category. So for instance, a facultative wet plus plant will now just be a facultative wet plant. The review panel is currently reevaluating all FAC minus plants to decide if they will be facultative or facultative upland. And so the moral of the story is that the plants that we look at today will have those old wetland indicator statuses listed, but as the list is revised, we will change our information. So for today's talk, we're concerned with all of these plants. Our obligate plants, which occur in those low wet conditions, all the way up to our upland plants that will be on the top of the bank. So when we look at the streamside buffer schematic, we can see where each plant type would fit. And so we see that at the water's edge, we have facultative wet and obligate plants. When we move up into the floodplain area, we have facultative plants, which typically can handle both wet or dry conditions. And then on the top of the bank, we'll have our upland plants, which rarely will experience any flooding. And so we can also look at the schematic and look at plant sizes. The water's edge, we'll be looking at transplants or plugs, and just slightly above that, we'll have our live stakes. Bare roots or containers will be planted in the floodplain area, and containers will be planted on the top of the bank. So this picture is nice to be able to see where we would plant each of these plant sizes, and also so that we can view these based on zones, because when we start to look at our plants, we'll group them into zones 1 through 4. And so we see that for zone 1, that'll be those water's edge plants. Zone 2 would be the toe of the slope where we would plant our live stake species. Zone 3 would be bare roots and containers, and zone 4 would be those upland plants that are our container plants. So we can look at plant sizes, and we can see that in the top right-hand corner we have our wetland plant plugs, and those are really nice. They're a very small container plant, and so they've got a pretty good little root system on them, and can grow to be much larger plants. We start to think about container plants. We could have 1 gallons all the way up to 3 gallons, and really that depends on the budget of the project. We look in our or going counterclockwise down, we see the picture of the girl holding the live stakes bundle, and she's really excited about installing those into her stream bank. And then and so we see that those are just typically dormant hardwood cuttings. And then the last picture, we've got bare root seedlings, and those are good to have a little bit of a root system, but they lack a lot of those fine textured roots. So for zone 1 plants, those will be up on the water's edge, and we'll be looking at transplants, plugs, and these are all going to be herbaceous species. When I said that we'll be looking at some transplants, we realized that you can go out and harvest a lot of these plants, especially for zone 1. Harvesting has its benefits and has its drawbacks. It is a cheaper option, especially if you have an established wetland and you've gotten any required permits. Certainly you can go out and harvest these plants. However, harvesting transplants can be very labor intensive. You also run the risk of introducing weeds and bringing those into wherever you're planting. Our first zone 1 plant is Juncus effusus. This is soft rush. It does require sun, can handle about 3 to 5 inches of standing water, and sometimes deeper, depending on the season. It will be on the it will be a grass-like evergreen herbaceous plant, and so it's good because it can lay over during heavy flows. It does attract birds, and it is another plant that can be harvested and transplanted by dividing it. Carex crenata, this is fringed sedge. This is another good evergreen grass-like perennial, and this one's for part shade. It's a good plant also that can be transplanted, and it's got nice drooping inflorescences that bloom in May. And remember that rushes are round and sedges have edges, and so if you're ever out in the field and you're having trouble telling the difference, just use that rule of thumb. That will help. Our next plant is Iris virginica. This is blue flag iris. You want to make sure that if you order this plant that you specify that you want the southern blue flag iris, because there is a northern blue flag iris that's Iris versicolor. And so make sure that you're getting the right one for your region. You also want to make sure that you don't get Iris pseudochorus, because that is the yellow flag iris and it's considered to be invasive. And these can be difficult to tell apart unless they're in flower. So you just want to make sure that you specify to the nursery the correct plant that you're wanting. But this is a good herbaceous perennial. It's clump forming. It does spread by underground rhizomes, and it can be easily divided for transplant. It's a very attractive flowering plant, and so homeowners really do like this one because it does provide nice aesthetic benefits. Sparganium americanum. This is burr reed. It is an obligate plant, another one that can be transplanted. It's a good colonizer and really can tolerate flowing water. The waterfowl do really like the seeds. It can take sun to part shade, and so that can be good, especially if you're working in a sunny situation or a shady one. It does colonize by slender underground rhizomes, and it's got nice, attractive burr-like flower clusters from in the spring to the summer. So this is a good one. Here are some other plants that can be used in Zone 1. The majority of them are sedges, and then we also have Arundinaria gigantea, giant cane. So we move on to our Zone 2 plants. These are going to be live stakes. These are typically trees or shrubs. They are dormant hardwood cuttings, typically about 1/2 inch to 2 inch in diameter, and so we use the rule of thumb because typically our thumb is about 1/2 inch or a little larger. And so you can use that if you're out in the field harvesting. Use that rule of thumb. They're about 2 to 3 feet long, and they produce roots, leaves, and branches in one growing season. One thing to note about live stakes is that they can be used by homeowners or contractors, and so virtually anyone can install live stakes. They don't provide immediate stabilization. The roots will grow over time, and so you can use this in conjunction with an erosion control fabric if you need immediate stabilization. And so that can really help protect the stream bank from erosion while the live stake roots grow. It's important when planning to install live stakes to pay attention to the overhead canopy and choose plants based on the sunlight requirements. Live stakes are typically best when installed at a moderate slope. Typically that's 4:1. However, in a lot of our urban streams, we rarely see a 4:1 slope on those stream sides. And so, it's always going to be site specific for whether or not native plants alone or live stakes alone can handle or can fix the erosion problem on site. Our first species is Salix sericea. This is silky willow. Does require sun to shade, gets to be about 12 feet tall. It is a deciduous large shrub or small tree. Does have a spring bloom. It's also a larval host plant. Performs well in both the Piedmont and the coastal plains. And you can see here on the slide, I've got a picture from some research that I'll present a little later in the presentation, but you can see the coarse root system after about 9 months after installation. And you can also see the shoots to the left of that after only 3 months following installation. Cornus amomum, this is silky dogwood. It's a small to medium-sized multi-stemmed suckering shrub up to 10 feet tall. The branches do have a tendency to layer themselves, and so they may bend down and root very easily when in contact with wet soil. So again, those are those adventitious roots that it's able to form. Doesn't really have very attractive fall color. Does have reddish bark, which may help you identify it. and it has creamy white flowers in the spring. It's a good livestock plant because it suckers and layers easily to colonize an area, and in trials at Auburn, this plant has shown good results in above and below ground biomass after even just 3 months following installation. Physocarpus opulifolius, this is 9-bark. The common name comes from the bark, which continually molts into thin strips, each time exposing a new layer of bark, as if it had 9 lives. That's just a little tidbit for you. This is a good plant for sun to shade. It does have very attractive ripening fruits that are red, and then they start to droop, and then the seeds will attract birds. It's got a nice bronze to yellow fall color, and it's a good livestock choice simply for its sun to shade tolerance, and so this is one that can be used in just about any area. Cephalanthus occidentalis, this is buttonbush. This is a good one to provide a long bloom period. It does bloom for most of the summer. If you're trying to identify it, it does have big gray lenticels that are vertical on the older wood. It's usually about 6 feet tall, but can get to be up to 12 feet tall if it's in a condition or a situation that it really likes. After flowering, the heads will turn into ball-shaped buttons, and that's where the plant gets its name. It can get leggy, though, and so and if it's in an area that it does really like, it can also take over just a little bit. But, on our stream sites, when that's what we want a plant to colonize, it may not be such a bad thing. You just want to make sure that it's not out-competing other plants that you've installed. Sambucus canadensis, this is elderberry. It's a part shade plant. It gets to be about 5 to 12 feet tall, and it's wider than it is tall. It does have odd pinnately compound leaves, which makes it easy to identify in the field. During a lot of our wetter years, it will be a very productive plant and have a very fast growth rate. It does tend to sucker to form a colony. It's commonly used in the southeast as a livestock, mainly because it's commonly found on stream banks natively, and so it's very easy to harvest and install. I will note, though, that unfortunately the wood does tend to split when it's hammered into the stream bank as a livestock, and so that can be a drawback. So when we look at these pictures, we note that these are pictures taken from some research conducted on Auburn University campus on livestocks. And so this research aimed to screen plants for use as livestocks. And so we can note that our finer textured roots are on that top row, and then on the bottom row we see much different coarser textured root systems. And so this is important because our fine roots have a higher tensile strength and are effective at stabilizing the upper soil layers, while our coarse roots tend to extend to greater depths of the soil, and they can aid in anchoring large volumes of soil. And so the take-home message here is that you want to make sure that you use both fine and coarse textured roots. I will note that after 9 months, Cornus had really established consistent root systems, followed by Salix sericea. So those are 2 good plants that this study found that can be used for livestocks. Of course, all 4 of these can be used, but some may compete or may grow better than others. In past research, Salix niger has been shown to have a very weak root system, and so we don't recommend it based on that and the fact that it can really take over once it becomes established. It's also hard to find those thumb-width stakes because it's such a large tree, and so oftentimes if you purchase this or go to harvest it yourself, you'll end up with those really, really large diameter branches that can be very difficult to install. So we'll move on to our Zone 3 plants. These are going to be those floodplain plants. And so they will be occasionally flooded. These are facultative plants, and they might be bare root seedlings or containers. Platanus occidentalis is our first Zone 3 plant. This is sycamore. It's commonly used as a shade tree. It will also volunteer pretty readily. One fun fact about sycamore is that it grows, it has the largest trunk diameter out of all other native hardwoods, and so this is a really good one. It's got a real fast growth rate, and it's noted to have very strong root systems. Viburnum nudum, this is possum haw. This is a really good flood and drought-tolerant deciduous shrub. It gets to be about 6 to 10 feet tall. If you're looking at it for a landscape setting, it does have several very attractive cultivars to choose from, such as winter fir or brandywine. However, if you're planting this in a riparian buffer, you want to make sure that you don't use a cultivar. You want to use the straight species, and that's just to promote biodiversity. The good thing about this plant is that the berries are consumed by birds, and the great thing is that the flowers don't open all at one time, and so what we get is a varied fruit maturity rate on this plant, and so that's good to provide a longer food source for our birds. It's also got pretty nice red fall color, and so there's a good aesthetic value for homeowners. Clethra alnifolia, this is summer sweet. Gets to be about 6 feet tall and about as wide. It is a suckering shrub, and so it will form a colony very easily. It has a slow to moderate growth rate, but if in conditions that it really likes, it really will colonize the area. It does attract butterflies, hummingbirds, and the flowers I want to note that the flowers are held upright on this plant. We'll look at another plant that has similar flowers in a few minutes, Virginia sweetspire, and its flowers are not held upright, so that'll help you distinguish the two. Magnolia virginiana, this is sweet bay magnolia. Prefers part shade. It's a multi-stemmed, semi-evergreen to evergreen small tree. Does attract sweet bay silk moths. The blooms are creamy white in the summer and they're lemon scented. It's got a medium growth rate, and it does prefer part shade, but it can establish in sun. So this is a good one, and we do oftentimes see this one growing natively. Betula nigra, this is river birch, can grow to be about 30 to 40 feet just in 20 years. This is a tree that very commonly volunteers. It's a nice ornamental tree with exfoliating bark, and it also provides seeds for wildlife. And out of all the birches, river birch is the most insect and disease resistant. It also is noted to have a very strong root system. Itea virginica, Virginia sweetspire. This is quite possibly one of my most favorite plants. I had screened this plant for use in bioretention areas, and I can vouch for its flood tolerance as well as its very great drought tolerance. It's a semi-evergreen to deciduous shrub, gets to be up to 6 feet tall and a little bit wider than tall. I've seen this one growing very often on stream banks, especially in Alabama. It's a really good plant. It can be used as a live stake. I will say this though, you typically will find a very small diameter branch on this one, and so that rule of thumb or thumb width doesn't really apply to this plant, and so because it's such a small diameter branch, you really can't use a mallet or a dead blow hammer to pound this one into the stream bank. You really are focused more on using this one in soft sandy soils. Here are some other plants that can be used in this zone. A lot of them are herbaceous plants, and we also have a couple of trees. Zone 4 is the top of the bank or the upland area, and it's not likely to ever be flooded, so these are going to be upland plants. Asimina parviflora, this is dwarf pawpaw. It's a very good understory shrub for the shade. The fruit attracts small mammals, and the leaves do smell like bell pepper, so that's a good ID characteristic for you in the field. It attracts the zebra-tail swallowtail butterflies as well. Calicarpa americana, this is beautyberry. It prefers part shade to shade conditions, gets to be up to 6 feet tall. The main benefit of this plant is that it has these nice axillary white to lavender or lavender to pink blooms in this summer, and those are followed up by these huge just clusters of vibrant purple berries. And so these berries attract over 40 different bird species. They're browsed by rodents. Deer may also browse the foliage, and the flowers can also attract butterflies. So this has a very strong wildlife benefit. Calycanthus floridus, this is sweet shrub. Gets to be up to 9 feet tall with a 12-foot spread. It's a deciduous multi-stem shrub, and it's a good part shade understory shrub. It does sucker easily to form a colony, and the flowers have a very nice spicy smell. And also, those flowers are followed up by interesting urn-shaped fruits that do persist. And so this is a really nice plant. I actually have it in my own backyard. Pinus taeta, this is loblolly pine. It does volunteer very readily. It's an evergreen conifer, very fast growing, and is used as a nesting site by birds. It has a very fast, rapid growth rate, and it's got the fastest growth rate, in fact, of all the southern pines. It's also fire resistant. Cercis canadensis, this is eastern redbud. It's a sun to part shade plant. It's a small deciduous multi-trunked tree. Very attractive purple pea-type flowers in the spring. And these flowers are also edible if you're so inclined. I know a lot of places might use them in a salad. Here are some other options for Zone 4. Many of these are trees or shrubs. So in terms of scheduling, winter installation is appropriate for bare root seedlings and live stakes. These need to be installed when plants are dormant before bud break. You want energy to be put into root production. And so for our water's edge transplants and plugs, these are best installed in the spring or the fall. But if installed in the fall, they need plenty of time to develop healthy root systems before the first frost. Containers can be installed at any time of the year, but summer installation will mean more money for irrigation. In terms of costs, live stakes are typically about $22 for a bundle of 50. 3 gallons run between $9 and $12 per container. 1 gallon typically runs between $4 to $6, and plugs typically run between $1 to $2.15 per. And then our bare root seedlings are pretty cheap, about 75 cents to $1 each. So I thought I'd run through just very quickly how to plant a container, because you know, a lot of us work in our own landscapes, but I fear that most of the times we're not installing properly. We need to make sure that we're digging a hole that's 2 to 3 times the size of the container. And so I'd be willing to bet that most of you probably don't take the time to dig that big of a hole. But it's important because as we dig a larger hole, we're loosening up that soil and allowing those roots to explore that soil. And so you also want to make sure that you loosen any pot-bound roots. And so occasionally roots become matted, especially if they've been sitting at the nursery or at the garden center for a long period of time. And so you want to make sure that you cut those. You don't want those roots to girdle and cause problems later. And of course, you never want to plant in compacted soil. So for large-scale projects, there's always the option of using equipment. This might range from a shovel to a power auger or even to a hydraulic auger. And so if you're planting a lot of containers and it's a huge project, definitely want to recommend using the hydraulic auger. For bare root seedlings, you may need to store these temporarily. You can dig a V-shaped trench in a shady spot and of course keep them moist. And so when planting bare root seedlings, you can use a dibble, KBC, or a planting bar. So for how to plant a bare root, the first step is to make the hole, and so you're going to work the bar back and forth. The hole should be about 8 to 12 inches deep, and it just needs to be deep enough to accommodate the root system. You then want to insert the seedling. Make sure that the seedling roots are straight and not J-rooted. This can cause girdling and other problems later if they're J-rooted. You want to close the hole, and then you want to tamp the soil and always water it in no matter what season. And of course, never plant again in compacted soil. For lab stakes, the tools that we'll need include a dead blow hammer, a straight piece of metal such as rebar, and the stakes. They can be harvested or ordered from a local nursery. Harvesting can be time-consuming, but it's cheaper, especially if you have to pay shipping. And so being in Alabama, we don't have any nurseries that sell lab stakes, so we always have to order those out of state, and that can be quite costly. But whether harvested or ordered, you want to make sure that you soak these in buckets immediately before they are installed. And so if you order them and they arrive, you want to make sure that you soak them in water until you install them. So for installing live stakes, you want to install them at a 90-degree angle in the stream bank at or below bankful. And so this is just installing them perpendicular to the stream bank. You want to use your piece of rebar and your, and hopefully, well, I mean, you can use your dead blow hammer, but it will start to tear that up eventually. And so you may want to use a metal hammer for this, but you want to make a pilot hole with that rebar. And so once you've made that pilot hole, don't lose sight of the hole. Grab your stake and pound it into the stream bank using the dead blow hammer. You want to make sure that you orient the leaf buds facing upward. If you install the lab stake in the wrong direction, it's not going to root or grow any shoots. You want to install one stake every 2 to 3 feet in a triangular spacing pattern. In some cases, I mentioned that occasionally we will have, after we pound the lab stake into the stream bank, it will become damaged. And so you want to make sure that you remove that damaged hammer tip of the lab stake and make a fresh cut using a sharp pair of loppers. And so after pounding the stake into the stream bank, there should be about 3 to 4 inches left above the soil line. And so, if you've got more than that and you need to trim it down, you can use those loppers there for that as well. For harvesting lab stakes, you want to select straight branches and make an angled cut just below a leaf node or a node. That cut, your first cut below the node, should be an angled cut, and that's going to help you know which end is the bottom and which end is the top of the stake. And so you also want to come back and remove any of the side branches from it. And so in some cases, those can be used as whips to shove into the stream bank or as other stakes, depending on their length and diameter. Some tips for harvesting. I just mentioned this, but you can make sure that the cut that you're going to for the end that's going to be pushed into the stream bank needs to be angled, and that'll help not only when you're using the dead blow hammer to push it into the stream bank, but it'll also help avoid any confusion for which end is the end the roots will grow out of. You can also dip the ends, the top ends of the plants or the stakes into paint colors, and this will help differentiate between species. And this can be very helpful if you are harvesting multiple species, or if you're holding a workshop and you've got attendees that may not know the differences between the different lab stakes. And you always want to make sure that you store the lab stakes in a shady location and don't let them dry out. So seeding in zone 3 or the floodplain or upland areas is also an option. If you need to seed, you want to make sure that you rough the soil up to loosen it and incorporate any necessary amendments. Appropriate site preparation is important for increasing the chance of establishment and survival. And so, again, never plant in compacted soil. Seeding can be temporary or permanent. You want to spread the seed, cover it with mulch, and then use an erosion matting over that. But you may want to consult an erosion and sediment control company for information on that. Your temporary seeding will minimize any immediate erosion issues, and your species that you'll plant using that temporary seed is going to be based on the season. For permanent seeding, you can oftentimes find a wetland seed mix that's specifically geared towards planting in the floodplain, or you may be able to also find an upland seed mix. So I thought I'd run through very quickly a case study that, of the workshop that we conducted in Alabama. So, we talked about a moderate 4-to-1 slope is best for installing live stakes, but we realized that the reality is what we see here in the picture. Very steep banks, undercut, and, if you can see all the green in this picture, all of that is Chinese privet. And so this is the site where we held a backyard stream repair workshop in Alabama. The homeowner happened to be an extension specialist specializing in herbicide and invasive plant management. And so, we did explain to him that this site really did need more than live stakes alone and container plants. It really needed extensive design and engineering work, as well as equipment to really fix the problem here. But this year he understood that, and he said, well, I'd like to try live stakes, and maybe we'll go that route in the future. So Dr. Enlow, who lives at this location, has been steadily eradicating privet from his backyard and selecting out trees and other vegetation that he would like to keep. And so notice the overstory or the tree canopy. And so again, this picture was taken during the winter months, and so these trees haven't leafed out yet. But what you want to notice is that there are so many trees overhead that the species that we chose needed to be shade tolerant. And so if we look to either side of Dr. Enlow's property, we can see that's what his backyard used to look like. It's really is just a wall of Chinese privet. And in many cases, privet was the only plant holding the soil on the stream banks. So when we went out and did the initial site visit, we determined some areas that weren't ideal but couldn't hurt for live stakes. And so, we want to make sure that we're sending the right message here that, yes, this is an extreme situation, and we went in and installed live stakes, but we did recognize that this wasn't going to fix the problem. This may just buy him a little bit of time. So, some key points for this workshop. We didn't have a lot of money to spend. We did order the live stakes, but shipping was just as much as the stakes, and so we spent about $280 total. So that's about $140 on live stakes and about $140 on shipping. We did have some container plants that were left over from a past project that we could use. However, the list of plants that we had available to us, a lot of those were plants for full sun or, and weren't tolerant of shade, and so that list of plants we had became very small in the end when we actually went out to the site visit and saw how shady this area would be. We also wanted to make sure that when we had the workshop that we were able to expose a lot of the attendees to cut stump treatments on privet. And so, of course, expertise from another extension agent, that's always free. And, well, it's not always free, but it was free in this case because it was his property. So we went out for the site visit. We found some areas for live stakes, and so the bottom area, we'll go and plant live stakes there. And then we also found some shelf areas, or that top area, where we could plant some container plants. So when you look at this picture, where would you install live stakes? Would you install them on the point bar to your left in the picture there? No, neither one of those areas would be suitable for live stakes, because this is probably a very mobile bar that's going to eventually move downstream. And so it's not a good spot for live stakes. But we did find some areas that were appropriate, and so we had a workshop out there, installed, I want to say about maybe 200 live stakes. We found some upland areas where we could install some container plants, again some container plants moving down slope there on the shelf, and then live stakes at the toe of the slope. And so, of course, with all of these projects, education is a huge component. And so folks that came out for this workshop not only learned about live stakes and how to install them, and about native plants and ecosystems as a whole, but they also learned about eradicating Chinese privet. And so here's just a picture of some of the herbicide foam that we used during the cut stump treatments. The good thing about a cut stump treatment is that it's going to allow the root systems to stay in place until the container plants can become established. And so, of course, it's always important to measure, monitor, and document any project. And so we took tons of before and after pictures, and also put in a couple of survey pins. So here's a list of some nurseries in North Carolina where live stakes or wetland plants can be purchased. And then this is also a list of resources that were used to make this presentation, and that I use for any horticultural needs. And so, Dr. Durr has his manual of woody landscape plants, and that's a very good resource. Wildflower.org is another resource that I use quite frequently, simply because in their plant search database, all the plants on that database are native, and so if you search a